Did a mighty emperor truly offer his kingdom for a glance from his male beloved? Could the most sacred vows of a famous thinker have been sealed not with a ring, but with a shocking act of self-dedication? Were the tightest bonds between ancient heroes and their trusted generals more than just battlefield camaraderie hinting at secrets openly whispered in their time? And why did some of history's most brilliant poets and philosophers choose a life path away from marriage, leaving behind clues in their writings and whispers among their peers? Get ready to explore the lives of 11 remarkable individuals from ancient times. They were famous, powerful, and creative, but they also stood apart for not following the conventional path of marriage, at least not in the way society expected. We will journey through their stories, looking at the facts and the intriguing details that surrounded their personal lives without jumping to our own conclusions. These are the tales of history's notable figures, who might be called confirmed bachelors, and the fascinating whispers their lives left behind. Number 11. Pausanias of Athens, the man who argued for love between men. In the vibrant city of ancient Athens, a place bubbling with new ideas about philosophy, art, and life, lived a man named Pausanias. We do not know a vast amount about Pausanias' everyday life, like his job or his family tree, in great detail. But he steps into history in a very bright spotlight, thanks to the famous philosopher Plato. Pausanias was a real person, and he was known to be the long-term companion of Agathon, a tragic poet whose victory at a drama festival sets the scene for one of Plato's most well-known works, the Symposium. The Symposium is not just any book. It is an account of a dinner party, a gathering of intelligent and articulate men who decide to spend their evening giving speeches in praise of Eros, the god of love and desire. It is here, among famous names like Socrates himself, that Pausanias makes his mark. He was not a philosopher by trade, but his contribution to the discussion was profound and has been talked about for centuries. When it was Pausanias' turn to speak, he did not just offer simple praise for love. He presented a complex argument suggesting that there were actually two kinds of love, associated with two different versions of the goddess Aphrodite. There was, he explained, Aphrodite, Pandemos, or common Aphrodite. This love, Pausanias argued, was for the ordinary, unthinking kind of lover. It was a love directed towards women and young immature boys, focused merely on physical satisfaction and not on the intelligence or character of the beloved. Such lovers, he said, desire to get the bodily pleasure and be done with it. But then Pausanias introduced another, more noble kind of love, Aphrodite Urania, or heavenly Aphrodite. This goddess, born only from a male, Uranus, without a mother, represented a love that was purely male-oriented. This heavenly love, according to Pausanias, was directed towards older boys or young men who were beginning to show intelligence and virtue. It was a love that aimed for a lifelong companionship, mutual improvement, and the cultivation of the mind and spirit. Pausanias argued that this love was superior because its object was stronger and more intelligent. He even suggested that Athenian society and other sophisticated Greek states implicitly recognized the value of this kind of male love by allowing it, even if there were some social complexities around its expression. Pointed out that in some less civilized places such love was condemned, while in others like Elis and Boeotia it was straightforwardly accepted. The fact that Pausanias delivered such a detailed and unapologetic defense of love between men at a prominent social gathering as recorded by Plato is significant. It suggests that these ideas were not entirely hidden or whispered in the dark, but were topics for open discussion and philosophical exploration, at least within certain educated circles of Athenian society. Pausanias himself is portrayed as being in a committed, long-standing relationship with Agathon, which would have been known to everyone at the party. His speech, therefore, can be seen as not just a theoretical exercise, but a reflection of his own life and values. While the Symposium does not explicitly state Pausanias was a bachelor in the sense of never marrying a woman, his entire argument, his known relationship with Agathon, and the context of the discussion strongly focus on male-male love as the highest form. The narrative presents him as deeply invested in this type of relationship, which took precedence. The secret, if we can call it that, is the remarkable candor and intellectual framework Pausanias provided for understanding and valuing same-sex love in ancient Greece. His speech reveals a world where such relationships could be seen not as a failing or a perversion, but as a path to virtue and philosophical insight, a concept quite different from how love and marriage were often viewed in other contemporary and later societies. He was not just living a certain way. He was articulating a philosophical basis for it, challenging his listeners then and readers now to think about love in more complex ways. Number 10. Diogenes of Sinope, the original rebel who needed no one. Imagine a man living in a large ceramic jar in the marketplace, owning almost nothing and openly mocking the most powerful people of his time. This was Diogenes of Sinope, one of the founders and most famous figures of Cynic philosophy in ancient Greece, who lived in the 4th century before Common Era. He was born in Sinope, a Greek colony on the Black Sea, but was exiled and ended up in Athens, and later Corinth. His life was a radical performance of his philosophical beliefs. Cynicism, as Diogenes practiced it, was about rejecting conventional desires for wealth, power, fame, and social standing. The goal was to live a life of virtue in agreement with nature, which meant embracing simplicity, self-sufficiency, and freedom from societal norms. The very name cynic likely came from the Greek word for dog-like, kynikos, and Diogenes embraced this, behaving with a shocking lack of shame and a directness that many found offensive but others found refreshingly honest. He believed that humans had complicated life unnecessarily and should look to animals for guidance on how to live naturally. There are countless anecdotes about Diogenes, many recorded by the later biographer Diogenes Laertius. Perhaps the most famous is his encounter with Alexander the Great. When Alexander, the conqueror of much of the known world, came to Corinth, he was intrigued by the philosopher and went to meet him. Finding Diogenes sunbathing, Alexander stood over him and asked if there was anything he could do for him. Diogenes reputedly replied, "Yes, stand out of my sunlight." Alexander was said to be so impressed by Diogenes' independence and lack of awe that he remarked, "If I were not Alexander, then I should wish to be Diogenes." This fierce independence extended to all aspects of life, including relationships and family. Diogenes saw marriage, along with other social institutions, as an unnecessary complication and a trap that hindered true freedom. He never married and had no known children. His bachelorhood was not just a personal preference, but a fundamental part of his philosophical practice. He needed no one and nothing beyond the bare essentials for survival. Why encumber oneself with a spouse, family responsibilities, and the societal expectations that came with them when one could be free? Anecdotes about his views on sex and family reinforce this. He was said to perform bodily functions, even acts of private relief, in public, arguing that if something was natural, it was not shameful to do it openly. When it came to desire, he advocated for the simplest satisfaction. If he needed food, he would beg for it. If he needed shelter, his tub or the porticos of buildings sufficed. This logic extended to companionship. He sought wisdom and truth, not emotional entanglements that society prescribed. Diogenes Laertius reports that when Plato defined man as a featherless biped, Diogenes plucked a chicken and brought it into Plato's academy, saying, "Behold, I've brought you a man." This kind of disruptive, provocative behavior was his trademark. The secret of Diogenes is not some hidden affair or unrequited love, but the sheer unyielding consistency with which he lived his radical philosophy of detachment. He took the idea of self-sufficiency to its absolute limit. In a world that valued family, lineage, and social contribution through traditional roles, Diogenes declared them all irrelevant to a virtuous and happy life. His choice to remain a bachelor was not a passive one. It was an active daily demonstration of his belief that true freedom meant needing nothing and no one that society deemed essential. He was a man who truly lived as if he were an island, reliant only on nature and his own stark principles. Number 9. Pythagoras, the mystery man of numbers and a secretive brotherhood. Pythagoras of Samos, who lived around the 6th century before Common Era, is a name many people know from mathematics class. The Pythagorean theorem is famous, but the man himself is shrouded in much more mystery than his enduring mathematical contribution. He was far more than just a mathematician. He was a philosopher, a spiritual leader, and the founder of a unique way of life that attracted a devoted following, often described as a brotherhood or a school. One of the challenges in knowing the real Pythagoras is that no writings by him survive, if he even wrote anything down. Most of what we hear about him comes from writers who lived hundreds of years later, like Porphyry and Iamblichus, who were Neoplatonist philosophers with their own agendas, often portraying Pythagoras as a semi-divine figure. These later accounts mix historical fact with legend, making it hard to sift out the original man and his teachings. After leaving his home island of Samos, possibly due to disagreement with the tyrant Polycrates, Pythagoras traveled extensively, reputedly studying with priests in Egypt and sages in Babylon, before settling in Croton, a Greek city in southern Italy. There, he established his community. This was not just a school for learning. It was a disciplined communal way of life with strict rules covering diet. Many Pythagoreans were vegetarian or had specific food prohibitions, like beans. Daily routines, ethical conduct, and a vow of secrecy. They believed in the transmigration of souls, reincarnation, and that mathematics and music were keys to understanding the universe and purifying the soul. Pursuit of knowledge was a spiritual quest. Question of Pythagoras's marital status is complex due to these later, sometimes contradictory sources. Some accounts, particularly those from Iamblichus, mention that Pythagoras married a woman named Theano, who was herself a philosopher and mathematician, and that they had children. Theano is sometimes depicted as one of his most gifted pupils. However, these stories of his marriage appear relatively late in the biographical tradition. Earlier sources are often silent on the matter, or the emphasis is so heavily on his role as the founder and leader of a celibate or highly ascetic community that marriage seems out of character with the core principles of the early Pythagorean way of life as described. Some scholars suggest that the figure of Theano and his marriage might have been a later addition to make Pythagoras appear more aligned with conventional societal norms, or that Theano was a symbolic name for a leading female member of his school. The intense focus of the Pythagorean community was on philosophical study, spiritual purification, and communal living, with loyalty to the brotherhood and its master often depicted as paramount. Within such a structure, personal romantic marriage might have been seen as a distraction from the higher calling, or at least not the primary focus for the master himself. The rules of the brotherhood often emphasized restraint and order in all things. The secret of Pythagoras, then, revolves around the true nature of his personal life within this highly structured and secretive community. Was he a married man with a family, as some later tales suggest? Or was his primary commitment to his philosophical family, his brotherhood with an emphasis on a disciplined, perhaps celibate or highly ascetic life, dedicated to the pursuit of wisdom and cosmic harmony? The very secrecy of the early Pythagoreans means that the precise details of their inner practices and the personal life of their founder remain partly veiled. What is clear is that his life was dedicated to a unique blend of intellectual and spiritual discipline that set him and his followers apart, making conventional domestic life, if he had one, secondary to his grander mission of understanding the cosmos and living in harmony with it. Number 8. Zeno of Citium the Stoic, who kept his cool even in love. Zeno of Citium, a merchant who became a philosopher after a shipwreck, brought him to Athens around 313 before Common Era, was the founder of Stoicism, one of the most influential philosophical schools of the ancient Hellenistic and Roman world. Stoicism taught that virtue, the highest good, is based on knowledge, that the wise live in harmony with divine reason, logos, that governs nature, and that we should be indifferent to pleasure, pain, and fortune. The goal was patheia, a state of mind free from disturbing passions, leading to tranquility and wisdom. Zeno himself was described by ancient writers, particularly Diogenes Laertius, in his Lives and Opinions of Eminent Philosophers, as a man of considerable personal austerity and self-control, embodying the principles he taught. He was reportedly dark-skinned, tall and thin, and lived a very simple life, eating uncooked food and wearing thin clothes. He taught in the Stoa Poikile, the painted porch, in the Agora of Athens, from which his school derived its name. Throughout his long life, he is said to have lived to an old age. Zeno never married. This choice seems consistent with the Stoic emphasis on minimizing external attachments that could lead to emotional disturbance. While Stoicism did not outright condemn marriage or family, later Stoics like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius were married and had children and wrote about fulfilling social duties. The founder's own life path suggests a deep personal commitment to a kind of philosophical detachment that perhaps made marriage less of a priority per end as undesirable for him personally. Diogenes Laertius provides some intriguing, if sometimes anecdotal, details about Zeno's personal life and views. He records that Zeno was fond of young men and mentions specific names of students or companions with whom he was said to have close relationships. For instance, he was reportedly very attached to his pupil Perseus. There are also stories of Zeno engaging in witty exchanges about love and desire. One anecdote claims that when asked why he was sometimes stern with young men, he replied that it was like gardeners who put up fences around delicate plants. Another suggests that he once remarked that his most unprofitable scholar was a youth with a fair outside and an empty head. These snippets from ancient biographers suggest that Zeno, while advocating for control over passions, was not devoid of personal affections or perhaps even attractions. However, how these were expressed or integrated into his Stoic philosophy is not always clear. Stoicism taught that one should act according to nature and reason. For Zeno, this may have meant that his relationships, whatever their nature, were governed by principles of virtue and propriety, as he understood them rather than uncontrolled passion. The secret of Zeno of Citium lies in how this deeply influential philosopher, who taught the world to seek inner peace by mastering emotions, navigated his own personal affections and his decision to remain unmarried. Did his philosophy demand a bachelor's life for its founder to fully embody its principles of detachment? Or did his personal inclinations, perhaps for the companionship of his male students, fit within his understanding of a life lived according to nature? The ancient accounts offer tantalizing glimpses, suggesting a man who, while preaching emotional control, still experienced human connection, albeit on his own Stoic terms. His life remains a testament to the idea that profound philosophical engagement can shape every aspect of one's existence, including the most personal choices about love and companionship. Number 7. Origen of Alexandria, the scholar whose devotion knew no bounds. Origen Adamantius who lived from approximately 184 to 253 Common Era, was one of the most brilliant and controversial thinkers of early Christianity. A prolific writer, theologian, and scholar from Alexandria in Egypt, he produced an immense body of work, including textual criticism of the Bible, commentaries, philosophical treatises, and defenses of the Christian faith. His intellect was legendary, and his dedication to his studies and his faith was absolute. He lived an ascetic life, characterized by fasting, poverty, and intense labor. From a young age, Origen displayed extraordinary religious fervor. His father, Leonides, was martyred during the persecution of Emperor Septimius Severus around 202 Common Era, and the young Origen reportedly wished to die alongside him, only being prevented by his mother hiding his clothes. He took it upon himself to support his mother and younger siblings, initially by teaching grammar and later by becoming a leading Christian teacher and head of the Catechetical School of Alexandria, a renowned center of Christian learning. Throughout his life, Origen remained unmarried and committed to a celibate lifestyle. This was not uncommon for deeply religious figures dedicated to scholarship and spiritual pursuits in the early church. His celibacy was often seen as a higher spiritual state, allowing for undivided devotion to God. However, Origen's commitment to this ideal is associated with one particularly shocking and famous act. Church historian Eusebius of Caesarea, writing in the 4th century, recounts in his church history that Origen, in his youthful zeal and desire for purity, took a passage, "For there are eunuchs who were born that way, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others, and there are those who choose to live like eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. The one who can accept this should accept it in an extreme the kingdom of hence." According to Eusebius, Origen secretly castrated himself. Eusebius suggests several motivations: to fulfill the scripture literally, to ensure he could teach female catechumens without any hint of scandal or personal temptation, and out of an immoderate youthful ardor. This act, though done in private, eventually became known. Demetrius, the bishop of Alexandria, with whom Origen later had significant conflicts, initially admired Origen's zeal but later used this act, among other reasons, to criticize him and prevent his ordination as a priest in Alexandria. Origen was eventually ordained a priest in Palestine, but the controversy surrounding his self-castration, his speculative the ecclesiastical authorities followed him. The secret of Origen is not just that he remained a bachelor, but the extreme and deeply personal act of devotion that underscored his commitment to a life set apart for God. This act, whether driven by an interpretation of Scripture, a desire for absolute purity, or a practical concern about his teaching role, reveals the profound intensity of his faith and his willingness to go to extraordinary lengths to live up to his spiritual ideals. While later church councils would condemn such self-mutilation, and Origen's own mature reflections might have tempered his youthful literalism, the story remains a stark testament to a man whose intellectuals that was, and still is, deeply shocking. It highlights a period in early Christianity where the boundaries of devotion and ascetic practice were being explored in sometimes radical ways, and Origen stood at the forefront of that exploration, body and soul. Number 6. Plotinus, the philosopher, who lived in a world beyond the physical. Plotinus, who lived from around 204 to 270 Common Era, was a pivotal philosopher of antiquity, born in Egypt and later teaching in Rome. He is widely considered the founder of Neoplatonism, a school of thought that profoundly influenced centuries of Western and Middle Eastern philosophy, theology, and mysticism. His teachings focused on a supreme transcendent principle he called the One, from which emanate nous, divine mind or intellect, and soul, and ultimately the material cosmos. The goal of human life for Plotinus was to achieve mystical union with the One, an ascent of the soul back to its divine origin. Our main source of information about Plotinus's life comes from his student, Porphyry, who wrote a biography titled Life of Plotinus as an introduction to his master's collected writings, Enneads. Porphyry portrays Plotinus as a man of intense spiritual focus, almost otherworldly in his detachment from mundane concerns. He was deeply ascetic, paying little attention to his physical needs or appearance. Porphyry notes that Plotinus seemed ashamed of being in the body, avoided discussing his ancestry or homeland, refused to have his portrait painted, arguing why create an image of an image, the body already being a lesser image of the soul, and ate very little, often abstaining from meat. Consistent with this profound detachment from the physical world and its entanglements, Plotinus never married and showed no inclination towards romantic or family life. His entire existence was centered on his philosophical work, teaching his students and his own inner spiritual journey towards the One. Porphyry describes him as having a gentle and kind disposition, and he was entrusted with the care and education of several orphan children by noble Roman families, managing their affairs with integrity. Yet these responsibilities seemed to be undertaken as a matter of duty and compassion, rather than from any personal desire for domesticity. Plotinus's philosophy itself emphasized a turning away from the senses and the allurements of the material world towards the intelligible realm. The body and its passions were seen as potential obstacles to the soul's ascent, while he did not advocate for extreme harsh asceticism for everyone. His personal example was one of remarkable self-discipline and focus on the transcendent. His philosophical circle in Rome included men and women, and he treated them all with respect as fellow seekers of wisdom. But his relationships seem to have been primarily intellectual and spiritual. The secret of Plotinus is not a hidden scandal, but the almost ethereal quality of his existence, a life lived so intently on a spiritual plane that the ordinary concerns of human life, including marriage and family, simply seemed to hold no sway over him. His bachelorhood was a natural consequence of his philosophical worldview and his personal temperament. He sought a union far more profound and all-encompassing than any earthly relationship could offer, the mystical union with the ultimate source of all being. Porphyry recounts that Plotinus experienced this ecstatic union with the One several times during his life. For a man whose gaze was so firmly fixed on such transcendent realities, the conventional path of marriage likely seemed irrelevant, a distraction from the soul's true purpose and ultimate destination. His life was a testament to the power of a singular focus on the spiritual, a journey inward and upward, away from the complexities of worldly attachments. Number 5. Epaminondas of Thebes, the general whose closest bonds were forged in war and peace. Epaminondas, who lived in the 4th century before Common Era, was one of ancient Greece's most brilliant and virtuous military commanders and statesmen. Hailing from the city-state of Thebes, he rose from a background of honorable poverty to become the architect of Thebes's short-lived but decisive ascendancy over Sparta, shattering the myth of Spartan invincibility at battles like Leuctra in 371 BC and Mantinea in 362 BC. Ancient writers such as Plutarch, Diodorus Siculus, and Cornelius Nepos praise him not only for his military genius. He pioneered Nemetic tactics like the deep phalanx and the oblique order, but also for his profound learning, eloquence, incorruptibility, and gentle nature. Amidst these accounts of his public achievements and virtues, a consistent detail emerges. Epaminondas never married and had no children. This was unusual for prominent Greek statesmen and general, as marriage and heirs were typically expected for continuing one's lineage and contributing to the city-state. Plutarch, in his Dialogue on Love, Erotikos, explicitly mentions Epaminondas's unmarried status and uses it as a point of discussion. One character in the dialogue remarks that Epaminondas remained a bachelor his whole life. However, his lack of a wife did not mean his life was devoid of deep personal attachments. Ancient sources highlight several very close relationships Epaminondas had with other men. The most prominent of these was with Pelopidas, another leading Theban general and statesman who was his steadfast political ally and companion in arms. Their friendship was renowned for its loyalty and mutual respect. Plutarch describes their bond as one forged in shared ideals and dangers, noting that they fought side by side in battles, with Pelopidas reportedly being saved by Epaminondas on one occasion. Beyond his friendship with Pelopidas, Plutarch and other sources mention more intimate companionships. In his life of Pelopidas, Plutarch touches upon the Theban custom of lovers and beloveds within their military, particularly the sacred band of Thebes, an elite force of 300 soldiers made up of 150 male couples. While Epaminondas was not part of the sacred band in the same way, the cultural context is relevant. Plutarch, in his dialogue on love, mentions two young men particularly dear to Epaminondas, Asopicus and Cephisodoros. Cephisodoros was a fellow officer who fought alongside Epaminondas at the decisive Battle of Mantinea, where Epaminondas received his fatal wound. According to Plutarch, Cephisodoros fell fighting valiantly near his commander. There is a poignant tradition, also reported by Plutarch, that Epaminondas requested to be buried with these two beloved companions, or that they were buried near him, a testament to the depth of their bond. When chided by a colleague for remaining childless and thus having no one to carry on his name, Epaminondas is said to have replied that his victory at Leuctra was a daughter who would live forever and preserve his memory. This suggests he saw his contribution to Thebes and his legacy in terms of his public actions and military achievements, rather than through conventional family. The secret of Epaminondas lies in the nature of these profound male bonds, which for him seemed to take the place of marriage. In a society like Thebes, which had unique military and social structures, such as the sacred band, intense friendships and possibly romantic relationships between men, especially soldiers, were not necessarily hidden, but rather integrated into their way of life and even seen as strengthening military cohesion and valor. Epaminondas's life, dedicated to philosophy, Theban liberation, and his close male companions, shows a different path to fulfillment and legacy than that of a husband and father. His story hints at a world where the lines between camaraderie, mentorship, and love between men were perhaps more fluid and accepted, forming the bedrock of a remarkable life of service and virtue. Number 4. Horace the poet, who sang of wine, women, and boys. Quintus Horatius Flaccus, known to us simply as Horace, was one of the greatest poets of Rome's Golden Age, flourishing under Emperor Augustus in the latter half of the 1st century before Common Era. Born in Venusia in southern Italy, the son of a freedman who sacrificed much to give him a good education in Rome and Athens, Horace rose to become a key literary figure, a friend of the epic poet Virgil and a member of the influential literary circle patronized by Maecenas, a close advisor to Augustus. His works, which include the odes, epodes, satires, and epistles, are celebrated for their wit, elegance, technical mastery, and reflections on life, love, friendship, and the Roman world. Throughout his life, Horace never married. He lived comfortably, thanks to the patronage of Maecenas, who gifted him a beloved Sabine farm, a place of retreat and inspiration often celebrated in his poetry. His poems paint a picture of a man who enjoyed good company, fine wine, the beauty of nature, and the pleasures of love, but he seemed to prefer a life free from the commitments and responsibilities of marriage and family. His focus was on his art, his friendships, and a kind of philosophical Epicureanism that valued tranquility and moderate pleasure. What makes Horace particularly interesting in the context of confirmed bachelors is the candor with which his poetry addresses his attractions and romantic or erotic interests, which were not limited to one gender. In his odes and epodes, Horace writes with passion and often a touch of wry humor about his infatuations with a variety of women, giving them charming Greek names like Lydia, Chloe, Pyrrha, Lalage, and Glycera. These poems explore the joys and pains of love, the fickleness of lovers, and the fleeting nature of beauty and passion. However, just as openly Horace writes about his attraction to young men or boys, also often given Greek names in his poems. For example, in one ode, Book 1, Ode 4, he warns a friend about the charms of the boy Ligurinus. In another, Book 5, Ode 1, an older Horace complains that Venus, the goddess of love, is trying to stir his passions again, this time for a boy named Ligurinus. He also writes of other boys like Gyges and Calais. This expression of desire for both sexes was not necessarily shocking or deeply hidden in Roman society of that era, particularly within sophisticated literary circles. Roman attitudes towards sexuality, while complex in having their own codes and taboos, were different from later Western Moors, and a certain degree of bisexuality, especially for elite men, was often acknowledged or even taken for granted, as long as specific power dynamics were observed. The secret, if one can call it that, is not that Horace had these attractions, but the relative openness with which he wove them into his enduring poetry. His work provides a window into a world where such feelings could be expressed with artistry and wit, becoming part of the rich tapestry of human experience, he chronicled. While his poetic persona might not be a direct, literal autobiography, the recurring themes of love for both women and boys are too consistent to be dismissed merely as literary convention. They suggest a man comfortable with a wider spectrum of affection and desire, who chose a life of artistic creation and carefully cultivated friendships over the bonds of matrimony. His bachelorhood allowed him the freedom to pursue his muses, whether they were inspired by the allure of Lydia or the grace of Ligurinus, and to record those inspirations for posterity with an unmatched poetic voice. Number 3. Virgil, the shy bard of Rome's golden age and his maidenly nickname. Publius Virgilius Maro, or Virgil as he is known in English, stands as one of the colossal figures of Latin literature, the poet who gifted Rome its national epic, the Aeneid. Living from 70 to 19 before Common Era, during a period of profound transformation from republic to empire under Augustus, Virgil also penned the eclogues or bucolics, pastoral poems depicting idealized rural life, and the Georgics, a didactic poem on farming and country life. His work was deeply influential, shaping Western literature for millennia. Despite the immense fame and public significance of his poetry, Virgil himself was known in antiquity as a man of a remarkably private and retiring nature. Ancient biographical accounts, primarily a life of Virgil attributed to Aelius Donatus, though likely drawing on earlier work by Suetonius, paint a picture of him as exceptionally shy, modest, and somewhat rustic in his manners despite his precipitated education and connections to the highest echelons of Roman society, including Emperor Augustus and his patron Maecenas. He was reportedly tall, but of delicate health, and when recognized in public, he would often flee into the nearest house to avoid attention. This reclusive poet never married and had no children. His life was dedicated to his studies, his poetry, and his close circle of friends, which included fellow poet Horace. The Ancient Life of Virgil provides some intriguing details that hint at his personal inclinations and perhaps why he remained a bachelor. It records that in Naples, where he spent much of his time, Virgil was popularly given the nickname Parthenius. This Greek word translates roughly to maidenlike or the virgin. Donatus suggests this was due to his extreme modesty, his shy and blameless life, and perhaps his general avoidance of or lack of interest in women. Further fuel for speculation about Virgil's personal affections comes from his own poetry, particularly his second eclogue. This poem is a passionate, melancholic monologue delivered by the shepherd Corydon, who is desperately in love with a beautiful boy named Alexis. Alexis is the favorite of Corydon's master and spurns the shepherd's rustic gifts and declarations of love. The language of Corydon's lament is intensely emotional and personal. "Ah, cruel Alexis, you care nothing for my songs. Have you no pity for me? You will force me to die at last." Some ancient commentators and many modern scholars have interpreted this eclogue as having a personal resonance for Virgil, perhaps reflecting his own unrequited feelings or his experiences with same-sex love. While using a persona in poetry is common, the depth of feeling in Eclogue 2 has often led readers to see a glimpse of the poet's own heart. Donatus's biography also explicitly states that Virgil was more inclined to the love of boys. It mentions two young men to whom he was reportedly attached, Cebes and Alexander. The latter, he says, Virgil refers to as Alexis in the second eclogue. These biographical claims, written a couple of centuries after Virgil's death, but based on earlier sources, suggest that Virgil's preference for male companionship was known, or at least widely rumored in antiquity. The secret of Virgil, then, is the story whispered behind the monumental facade of the Aeneid's author. It is the tale of a profoundly shy man, nicknamed the Maidenly One, whose personal life seemed to diverge from conventional Roman expectations of marriage and family, and whose own pastoral poetry contained powerful expressions of love between men. While his epic poems celebrated Roman destiny and traditional virtues, his personal life and perhaps his more intimate poetic expressions hinted at a different kind of sensibility, one that found beauty and affection in ways that were noted by his biographers. His bachelorhood set against the backdrop of these ancient reports and the suggestive nature of poems like Eclogue 2 adds a layer of poignant intimacy to the image of Rome's greatest epic poet. Number 2. Plato, the philosopher of love, who never took a wife. Plato, living from approximately 428 to 348, before Common Era, is arguably one of the most influential thinkers in the entire history of Western philosophy. A student of the enigmatic Socrates and the teacher of the equally brilliant Aristotle, Plato's ideas have shaped thought on metaphysics, ethics, politics, knowledge, and art for over 2 millennia. He founded the Academy in Athens, often considered the first institution of higher learning in the Western world, where he taught and wrote extensively, leaving behind a rich legacy of philosophical dialogues. Throughout his long and intellectually prolific life, Plato never married and is not known to have had any children. His existence was wholly dedicated to philosophy, to teaching, writing, and leading the academy. This choice to remain a bachelor was not necessarily unusual for philosophers of his era, some of whom adopted ascetic lifestyles or saw family commitments as potential distractions from the pursuit of wisdom. However, Plato's case is particularly fascinating because of the central role that love or eros plays in his philosophical writings. Two of Plato's most famous dialogues, the Symposium and the Phaedrus, delve deeply into the nature of love, desire, and beauty. In these works, love, particularly the love inspired by youthful male beauty, is portrayed not merely as a physical urge, but as a potential catalyst for spiritual and philosophical ascent. In the Symposium, various characters give speeches on eros, culminating in Socrates' account of what he learned from the wise woman Diotima. She describes a ladder of love, starting with the appreciation of a single beautiful body, then moving to the beauty of all bodies, then to the beauty of souls, then to the beauty of laws and institutions, and finally to the beauty of knowledge, culminating in a vision of the form of beauty itself, absolute, divine, and eternal. The initial rungs of this ladder often involved paiderastic relationships, where an older man, the Erastes or lover, was inspired by the beauty of an adolescent boy, the Eromenos or beloved, and sought to cultivate the boy's virtue and intellect. Similarly, in the Phaedrus, Plato uses the metaphor of a charioteer, reason struggling to control two winged horses, one noble, representing spiritedness or higher emotions, and one unruly, representing base desires, to describe the soul's journey when confronted by beauty, especially the beauty of a beloved youth. True philosophical love, according to Plato, could help the soul sprout wings and ascend towards the divine realm of forms. Given Plato's profound and often highly positive philosophical treatment of male homoerotic love as a path to enlightenment, it is natural that people have wondered about his own personal life and affections. The ancient biographer Diogenes Laertius, in his Lives and Opinions of Eminent Philosophers, recounts various anecdotes about Plato. Though their historical accuracy is often debated, Laertius includes several epigrams attributed to Plato, expressing affection for young men. One famous epigram is addressed to a youth named Astor, meaning star, gazing at stars, my star. Would I were heaven to look at you with many eyes. Another epigram reportedly marked the grave of Dion of Syracuse, a student and friend whom Plato greatly admired and for whom he had deep affection, expressing profound grief at Dion's death. The secret of Plato is the intriguing interplay between his revolutionary philosophical ideas about love and the details, however scarce or contested, of his own personal life. He never married a woman yet. He placed love at the very heart of his philosophical system as a driving force towards the highest truths. The term Platonic love, in modern usage, often means a purely spiritual, non-physical affection. However, for Plato himself, the concept of eros began with a passionate, often physical attraction to beauty, which was then meant to be sublimated and transformed into a quest for philosophical wisdom. His decision to remain a bachelor, combined with his philosophical focus and the ancient biographical traditions, suggests a life where his deepest emotional and intellectual connections may have been with his male students and companions within the context of the specific customs of ancient Athenian society. His enduring legacy is not just his philosophy, but the enduring questions about how his own life might have reflected his profound insights into the complex nature of human love. Number 1. Alexander the Great, the conqueror, whose deepest love was not for an empress. Alexander I of Macedon, universally known as Alexander the Great, carved his name into history as one of the most formidable military commanders and conquerors the world has ever seen. Born in 356 before Common Era and tutored by Aristotle, he ascended to the Macedonian throne at the age of 20, and in just over a decade forged an empire stretching from Greece to northwestern India, dying undefeated in battle in Zea. His campaigns spread Greek culture and influence across a vast area, ushering in the Hellenistic Age. While Alexander's military and political achievements are legendary, his personal life, particularly his relationships, has been a subject of fascination and debate for centuries. Alexander did marry, not once, but 3 times. His first wife was Roxana, a Sogdian princess from Bactria, whom he married in 327 BA, a match apparently born of love at first sight, but also strategically crucial for pacifying the region. Later, in 324 BC, at a grand ceremony in Susa, he married 2 Persian princesses simultaneously: Statira I, a daughter of the defeated Persian king Darius E, and Parysatis E, a daughter of Artaxerxes E. These Susa weddings were overtly political, part of Alexander's policy to unite Macedonian and Persian aristocracies and legitimize his rule over the conquered Persian Empire. He also encouraged his senior officers to marry Persian noblewomen at the same event. Despite these marriages, which produced at least one son, Alexander Ive, by Roxana, the most significant and profoundly deep personal relationship in Alexander's life, as consistently portrayed by ancient historians like Plutarch, Arrian, Diodorus, Siculus, and Curtius. Hephaestion was a Macedonian nobleman, son of a minter, who grew up with Alexander, was educated alongside him and became his most trusted general and confidant. Their bond was exceptionally close, often described in terms that went far beyond ordinary friendship. Ancient writers frequently allude to the romantic and possibly sexual nature of their relationship, often by comparing them to the legendary Greek heroes Achilles and his beloved companion Patroclus. Arrian, in his Anabasis of Alexander, notes that when Alexander visited Troy at the beginning of his Persian campaign, he laid a wreath on the tomb of Achilles, while Hephaestion laid one on the tomb of Patroclus. This act was widely interpreted as Alexander identifying himself with Achilles and Hephaestion with Patroclus, implying a love similar to that celebrated in Homer's Iliad. Plutarch, in his Life of Alexander, remarks that Hephaestion was the one Alexander allowed to read his most secret letters. He also reports that Alexander used to say that Hephaestion was Philo Alexandros, friend of Alexander or loved by Alexander, and that Craterus, another general, was Philo Basilus, friend of the king or loyal to the kingly office. Aelian, in his Varia Historia, states that Alexander once referred to Hephaestion as another Alexander. The depth of Alexander's attachment to Hephaestion was most dramatically revealed upon Hephaestion's sudden death from illness in Ecbatana in 324 BC. Alexander's grief was monumental and unrestrained. Curtius, Rufus, and Arrian describe him flinging himself on Hephaestion's body, weeping for hours, cutting his hair in mourning, as Achilles did for Patroclus, and refusing to eat or drink for days. He ordered a period of public mourning throughout the empire, had the attending physician crucified or executed, and commanded that the sacred fires in temples be extinguished, a sign typically reserved for the death of a great king of Persia. He organized an incredibly lavish funeral pyre for Hephaestion in Babylon, costing a colossal sum, and sent envoys to the oracle of Siwa to ask if Hephaestion could be worshipped as a god. The oracle permitted honors as a divine hero. Beyond Hephaestion, other relationships are mentioned by ancient sources. Curtius Rufus writes of Alexander's affection for a Persian eunuch named Bagoas, who had previously been a favorite of Darius II. Curtius describes an incident where, after a dangerous river crossing, Alexander's troops, overjoyed to see him safe, demanded he kissed Bagoas, which he did, to applause. The secret of Alexander the Great is not that his marriages were political. That was common for rulers. It is the overwhelming evidence from ancient sources that his most profound emotional and likely romantic and intimate bond was with another man, Hephaestion. This relationship, characterized by unwavering loyalty, deep affection, and a partnership that shaped both their lives, appears to have been the central emotional anchor for one of history's most driven and powerful individuals. While the precise nature of their physical relationship cannot be definitively proven in modern terms, the ancient commentators who were far closer to the cultural context described it in ways that strongly suggest a love that encompassed all aspects of devotion. Alexander's story powerfully illustrates that even for the mightiest conquerors, the landscape of the human heart can be as complex and compelling as any empire they might seek to build.